Hi there, I'm Andrew Montesi and welcome back to Industry Leader Insights, where we explore the topics and trends shaping the future of our industry. Last week, Aaron Wagner from ATTOM helped us unpack what today's housing equity data is really telling us, looking beyond the headlines to understand why we're seeing market normalisation and what reverse mortgage professionals should focus on when interpreting property data. In part 2, we now turn our attention to the future. We explore the biggest forces likely to shape housing equity over the next 5 years, the regions best positioned for long-term growth, and the often overlooked factors that could have the biggest impact on America's housing wealth. Aaron also shares his perspective on how AI is transforming property intelligence, making sophisticated housing data more accessible than ever before. Perhaps most important for our industry, we discuss whether the long-term opportunity for reverse mortgages remains intact. Aaron's answer is a compelling one. While appreciation-driven equity has moderated from its post-pandemic highs, much of America's housing wealth is tenure-driven, built through decades of home ownership rather than short-term price growth. That means the equity foundation supporting the reverse mortgage market remains broad, durable, and according to ATTOM's data, continues to present an enormous long-term opportunity for the industry. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Aaron Wagner from ATTOM. Aaron, welcome back.
It's good to be with you.
Now, there's this conversation around, have we reached peak equity? Obviously, equity remains historically strong. As you've been talking about in the previous episode, there are these signs of moderation, normalization. How do you see the market evolving from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in our data, the equity-rich share peaked in the second quarter of 2024. We're just over 49%, about 31 million properties. And that same quarter, the seriously underwater share hit its low point. So mid-2024 was exceptionally strong grading on both ends, which lines up with this kind of the strong run in this industry's underlying asset had. But the peak is kind of the path to that peak explains a lot, and I think gives us inference for the future. So I mentioned last time the 2020 to 2022 price run, kind of that fastest on record, built that equity, taking the equity rich share from 27% to almost 50%. And then mortgage rates, obviously, everybody knows the story. Those roughly doubled over 2022 from 3 to 7%. And that equity rich share flattened out about a quarter later. So it dipped instead of falling because when rates jump, fewer people take out new mortgages, and brand new mortgages by definition, the loan with the least equity behind it. So the national mix shifted towards older loans that had been getting paid down over years, and that supported the numbers. And at the same time, homeowners sitting on those 3% mortgages stopped selling or slowed significantly, and inventory got scarce. So scarcity pushed prices back up. And that carried the equity-rich share to its final peak, mid-2024. So since then, kind of steady moderation, about 3 points a year. So was that the peak is the question? So very likely that one stands for a while, in my opinion. So getting to that 49% required kind of a once-in-a-generation combination, if not more. 3% mortgages, 20% annual growth rates, that's a lot. And so those aren't typical conditions. And so today's 43% is still higher than any reading before late 2021. So as for where it goes from here, I think the forces behind the moderation, kind of elevated rates, flattened prices, those haven't changed. And I don't think that those are going to change all that much in the coming years. Again, this is speaking personally from my crystal ball, not an economist's forecast, but barring a meaningful move in either one of those, I think it's reasonable to read the trajectory kind of as a continued gradual moderation that settles at levels that are still by historical standards strong, but not as strong as we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, we did have that those perfect conditions that are pretty hard to beat, that's for sure. So in terms of, say around the next 5 years, what factors do you believe are going to have the greatest impact on housing equity? And perhaps what are some of those factors that might be typically underestimated?
That's a very good question. I'd take more of a sort of a retrospective approach. So the drivers of the next 5 years are probably going to be very similar to the drivers of the last five. Obviously, the conditions are very different, but we've seen exactly how they work recently, kind of in full play. So just to name a few, so home prices, let's say demographics, and I think to answer your question about underestimated, I think housing supply is often underestimated, even from a data scientist's perspective. To take the first, home prices, obviously equity is a ratio, and for homes that are owned outright or nearly paid off, which is where most of that deep equity sits, the debt side doesn't move a lot. The equity moves almost entirely with the home value each year. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. Second, demographics. The question I hear the most is whether kind of older homeowners will finally sell in mass and unwind all of this. And so far, the evidence isn't pointing that way yet. That could change. But 2/3 of baby boomer homeowners have been in their homes for 16 plus years. Roughly a third, they say. They say they'll never sell. A third of those, obviously, that'll be put to the test. But more of these homes are going to be passing to heirs, despite what happens, and those aren't necessarily going to hit the market. So affordability cuts is also an interesting direction here. So when moving is expensive, high prices are everywhere, and high rates are on those new loans, it's really hard to give up that 3% mortgage. So if you're not passing on your home, staying put is the rational choice. So I would say affordability challenges don't unlock the equity necessarily. They just sort of lock it in place. Meanwhile, the demographic wave itself is the forward-looking factor that we don't really have a forecast, but it's arithmetic. Everyone who will be 75 will be 80, and it's going to be the largest retirement wave in American history, and those folks are going to be moving towards assisted living and other options. So I would say watch out for those. Without my crystal ball, it's hard to say how those will play out, but the demographics will be a large part of the story. And then third, kind of that underestimated aspect will be supply. So basically, I'll put on my valuations hat for this one because it's what I spend most of my days modeling. Since the Great Recession, single-family construction has never really returned to its earlier pace. Single-family permits are about 2.9 per 1,000 people against a historical average of 4.1. So there's chronic underbuilding. It's a structural floor under the home values that's actually keeping prices held up, even in periods when lots of folks expected them to fall harder. So scarcity is doing a lot of work, and I don't see that changing. That's sort of a long-term trend, but I think it is very, very underestimated. So folks that are expecting prices to fall, I think there's a lot buoying up these prices on the supply side. And in the 5-year horizon, I think that's going to be a stabilizer for a lot of the other dynamics that we might otherwise see shift prices and therefore equity.
Yeah, it makes for a very interesting time for home equity professionals in the finance space, that's for sure.
Yeah,
so in terms of geography, we talked a fair bit about it in part one. Which parts of the country do you see appear best positioned for future equity growth, particularly in the mid to long term? And I know you mentioned the ones that are up against it. It's kind of the ones that have come off the post-pandemic boom. I mean, how are you seeing this geography evolving in the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. Without an explicit forecast, I like to think of kind of I don't know, it's almost like thinking of three maps laid on top of one another. Obviously, you mentioned one where equity is cooling. So that pandemic boom, I mentioned last time, Florida, Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, Texas, places like that. Those are declining and ameliorating kind of the pandemic boom in equity. But they're still now like roughly the national average. But I would always think of, okay, where is equity cooling and where does it continue to cool? And then the other one is where equity is the deepest. There are three kinds of places that kind of share traits. Places where people have owned their homes a longer period of time on average. Those have held equities held strong in those areas. A lot of that is in coastal California. So San Jose is 65% equity rich with under 1% of homes underwater. So it's a very strong combination in a major market. And in the Northeast, there's Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, New York, and metros like Buffalo and Portland, Maine. And in the upper Midwest, so Michigan and Wisconsin, I mentioned last time, counties where affordable homes plus decades of tenure have produced the highest equity rich states in the country. So I think that looking at where equity is deepest is another way. And then really thinking about where there's genuine pressure. So there's one big region, the Gulf South. You can think about areas like Louisiana and Mississippi. Those are places that combine a few warning signs at once, sort of lowest equity rich rates in the country and the highest fastest rising underwater rates. New Orleans and Jackson are underwater large metros, for example. So not saying how those will move in forecast, but I think there is pressure there and a little bit of risk and volatility. And that's a big part of the story to think about those dynamics.
Absolutely. So again, considering those drivers we've talked about, the evolution of the geography of housing wealth, what do you think the long-term opportunity looks like for the reverse mortgage industry? Obviously, internally, people see this rising equity, affordability challenges, supply as opportunity. I mean, does the data back that up?
Yeah, so that's another great question. Regarding the equity base, so absolutely yes, and I can quantify that. I do that all the time. Even at the lowest equity rich reading since 2021, there are about 27.5 million properties in this country whose owners hold at least 50% equity. So that was even back before the sort of recent metrics, and that's double roughly the 14 million that existed in 2019. So in more than a quarter of all zip codes, the majority of mortgaged homes are equity rich. So the top 10 metros alone hold about 7.6 million equity rich homes. So there's a lot to gain there. And the composition of that equity matters for the long-term view. Much of it's tenure-driven, decades of ownership, as I mentioned before. And that kind of equity doesn't evaporate in kind of a soft quarter. So we just watched where appreciation-driven equity moderated meaningfully and the tenure-driven equity barely moved. So it's an interesting point. On affordability and supply parts of the question, those are kind of outside what this report measures, but I can note that they work in the same direction as everything I've described. Kind of expensive moves keep people in their homes and scarce supply keeps value supported. Both of those show up in our data as durability. And about 1.3 points came off the equity rich share last quarter. And that kind of tells that moderation story, but it doesn't change it. The equity base is enormous, broad, and durable. And that's not just my opinion, that's the count. So it's looking, obviously significant opportunity. I think the data supports that.
For sure. Yeah, Aaron, and finally, I'd love to just quickly get your thoughts on the impact of AI on property data over the next few years. You're right there in the thick of it. How do you see things evolving in the AI and property data space in the next few years?
Yeah, it's a fun time to be alive. As you mentioned, AI and housing data is not a future topic. It's obviously right here. Every the kind of number that we've presented in this report rests on kind of our AI platform. These AI analytics that we're doing. And for example, our AVM values more than 98 million residential properties individually, and we refresh that every month. But AI is just making that job easier. We're gaining more inference. We're running more models. We're able to validate things a lot faster. So it's doing work that kind of traditional methods used to apply, but it's doing it very, very quickly in terms of productivity. But one of my favorite examples is public records. Really can't tell you a lot about a home's condition, but you can mine kind of permit data. You can mine listings data. You can look at remarks, and you can use natural language processing and a lot of neural network models, really, really advanced methods to get at what home values are going to be in a new way when you're actually taking condition into account. So the tools are different. there's also new ways of interacting with the data. So it's a shift from kind of delivery to direct reasoning. So ATTOM, for example, is among the first in the property data space to stand up an MCP server. And without going into too many details, that's an interface that allows AI agents to query our data natively. And this is really a part that I get genuinely excited about, is someone who has never written a line of code, doesn't have to write a query, doesn't have to have a large engineering process between them and the data. They can just ask in plain English, how is equity shifted in this zip code that I serve, and which are the neighborhoods that change the most? And in seconds, they can get that information. And I mentioned MCP server because that's actually something that we're able to harness on ATTOM's side of things. The answers that you get are not hallucinations. They're protected against that. Those are cultivated responses on our side, so that you can actually trust what you're looking at. So it's an exciting time to be alive, an exciting time to be interacting with data.
Yeah, it's amazing. Gosh, so much happening in housing, equity, property wealth, AI, data. Man, you found yourself in the right position at the right time. That's for sure, Aaron.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Heckam World. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing upcoming reports from ATTOM. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me.